Bienvenidos a una nueva charla de ComPolCorp. Nuestra idea en esta ocasión es hablar acerca de la comunicación política desde un punto de vista muy académico, desde la idea de cómo es que los políticos ahora tienen este nuevo reto de acercarse a los ciudadanos en contextos digitales y sobre cómo este nuevo entorno, estos nuevos contextos están dificultando la manera en que los mensajes llegan. ¿Qué está pasando con la proliferación de noticias falsas? ¿Qué está pasando con los malos entendidos que se están generando en redes sociales? ¿Qué hacer con respecto a eso? En ese sentido, vamos a explorar la comunicación política. Y para hablar de eso, tengo el honor de presentar a Emma House. Emma estudió un máster en comunicación política por la Universidad de Ámsterdam. Además, tiene un máster en ciencia política por la Universidad de la Autónoma de Barcelona. Y finalmente, hace pocas semanas, obtuvo su PhD, su doctorado, en la European University Institute. Y actualmente, gracias a todo el trabajo que ha hecho con respecto a cómo proliferan las fake news y cuáles pueden ser los recursos que tienen los políticos para combatirlas, ha sido otorgada con un postdoctorado en la Universidad de Zúrich. Así que, Emma, muchísimas gracias por recibirnos. Welcome to this talk with ComPolCorp. It's a pleasure to see you again. Because we used to be classmates during our master in Barcelona, but now Emma has become an expert in this area of political communication. So just to warm up the conversation, I want to ask you, what is politics?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this introduction, Andrea, and thank you very much for having me and for this interview. So what is to me politics? To me, I guess it is a process of decision-making by political actors as well as public actors. When does something become a problem? What is the problem? Which problems do we address? How do we address them? And a certain sense of prioritizing problems over others.
That's true. I completely agree with your point of view, because I was watching one of the podcasts, one of the talks that ComPolCorp produced, the first one, in fact, with Rubio, and he defined politics like a tool that has three main areas, like the first one is talking about policies, no? What are the services that politicians should provide to the citizens? Which are the things that are responsibility of politicians? Then the other part, the other important area is the politics, no? How people negotiate, how they reach a consensus, which are the participants that will be taking part on them. But then he added a very important area, which is now communication. Because right now it's so important to tell people what politicians are doing, why they are doing, to frame the politics. So citizens can understand the implications, so citizens can also participate. But now, like when internet arrived, the idea of these interactions, constant feedback was very promissory for everybody, but now we are in a kind of era of misinformation in which people they are able to interact with the politicians, but then the information is not reaching the way it's supposed to be. So for you now, what is important to consider into political communication?
I think first it is important to take a step back. So what is actually the purpose of political communication? And I think one of them is the one you mentioned. So it is a way of like for politicians to inform citizens. But I think it's actually a two-step process whereby also the media, so communication, informs politicians of what citizens are experiencing or what it's like out there, so to speak. And this is for the simple reason that citizens do not sit usually in the chambers of politicians, and vice versa, politicians are not in the homes of so many citizens. And in this respect, I guess you mentioned, for example, social media. What this has changed, I think, is the pace by which information is becoming accessible to so many people. And so first, when with the media, they had a kind of gatekeeping role. So, they needed to make sure that all the necessary information was passed on from politicians to the citizens and the other way around. But now also citizens, and you don't have to be an established media company in order to basically come up with information or to write something. And this is going in such a fast-paced manner that it's hard for both politicians and people and the media, the three, I think, main actors in this story, to keep up with everything that is happening around the world. And in a certain sense, the media have to make selections in what they will tell the public. So there's so much happening in politics, they cannot cover everything. So in a way, they have to decide, so this is important and this is what we'll tell the public. So yeah, and in a way, I think with social media, which is I think a positive development rather than a negative one, is that citizens can actively engage with content. So they can say like, this I find super important and this I don't. And I think this is then also passed again back to politicians and to the media, and they can then respond to this.
Okay, now I completely understand what you tell me, and I mean, years ago we used to have kind of that, no? Because as you said, there was a gatekeeper, like, okay, this is all the amount of data, of information that I can have, but then which I will select, which one I will publish, what I'm going to tell people, okay? But now, as everybody can have a phone, can post things, can turn any issue into a public issue, it's harder. And for politicians, it's harder also, because that implies, first, much more people being aware of what people is talking about in order to answer, in order to address these issues. But also about, what can I do? Because I am a politician, I am just one person, and in my government, I have to govern thousands of citizens. How can I do this? And also, like, how can I be very sure that my message is reaching as the way I want citizens to understand it?
I guess you're asking multiple questions here, but to start with the last one, I mean, to say a bit more bluntly, there are of course people in service of politicians, such as spin doctors, for example, that help politicians do exactly this. So they will probably have a good image of what the electorate or the people that they want to reach are like, and according to what this person that thinks, okay, so probably the people that you want to reach or maybe want to persuade to vote for you, or what you think is a very important point, and you want to think also that that the people that you want to reach to also find it important to really get that message across. So I don't think that has become necessarily harder, because these traditional media and these gatekeepers are, in a way, they're still in place. But what has come on top of that, I think, is social media. So I think what becomes harder is rather the process of selecting for politicians and for the media to select from all these bits and pieces of information that also citizens can now produce, because they can address their concerns directly, to select from that, what is the most demanding issue out there. And I think social media is a great tool to, in a way, for citizens to speak up. But what becomes difficult is, where do you put the line? So when is something important enough? When have more like enough people spoken up about a certain topic in order for it to have become a point on the political agenda, let's say. So I guess here you're also talking about agenda setting and how something even becomes something on the political agenda.
Yes, that's true. And now I was thinking exactly the same. I mean, we as communicators have always talked about the agenda settings, all the advantages that they have, all the disadvantages that they represent, that we have multiple agendas. It's not just about the media agenda, also the Política agenda, also what is published, what is not, what is news worthy and what is not. So, I mean, I completely understand you. And now I think that we are facing a huge phenomenon because, in fact, nothing that is happening in social media is new. I mean, people have been talking about what politicians do in the public arena, like always, but of course the difference is like the scope that now social media can reach. I mean, one tweet can be read by a lot of people. One thing can produce like can have a bigger impact. So right now, like, it's not like a completely new phenomenon, but still we are very new in this, and we are not very sure of what of the implications that these, like social media and people talking about politics in social media, can have. I don't know if you right now have any idea, any intuition about what can happen there.
If you don't mind, I first would like to comment on what you said about the scope. I completely agree with you there, but I think you also have to take into account that there, for some reason, I think we perceive that there is much more, for example, misinformation and fake news out there, simply because there is more reporting on it. But the fact that there is more reporting on it has to do with that we now have more tools for reporting on it. It's not only the traditional media, which raises the questions, do politicians lie now more than before? I personally don't think so. I think it's just more reported on, and if anything, I think that politicians are being held more accountable than they were used to. So I think that this whole phenomenon and this new era that you're describing is, as you say, it's not a new one. I think the only thing that is really new is what it means to the people, in the sense that they think it's now more than ever because it's more reported on, while in fact I think it's probably the same. I don't think politicians have really changed in nature. It's lying, framing, it's a way of spinning a story, and this has always been a big part of politics, let's say. Then if you will repeat the last question you asked, like how social media...
Yes, how can these people talking about politics in social media can change, can it has any implication for democracy, for the way politicians are facing government? Do you think there's something there that maybe we have to pay attention at?
I mean, I think that social media definitely has the potential to bring about, movements. Look at the Arab Spring, for example. And I think if movements become big enough, then it's inevitable that politicians have to pay attention to it. So in that sense, I think it's a new form of protest as well. You don't longer have to go on the streets to make your point. You can also just blow up social media, and at one point it will be picked up, because if not, then the story will become even bigger. An example of this is Me Too. It's the Me Too movement. And yeah, of course, these social media can also backfire, because in a way you could make a very arrogant statement. This is not one I agree with, but it's like, what do the people know about politics, and why can they now all of a sudden influence what politicians think about? And I think that there is like, I don't have the answer, but I think now that's definitely a question that needs more attention, because I don't know, I think when many people are stepping away from traditional media as their news sources, don't only see voting as their only means of expression, to express their views about politics. So yeah, I mean, it can have, I think, both positive and negative influences. And a negative example would be what happened with the riots at the Capitol. So it can also spark something that's maybe that can lead to violence, which is of course not desired.
Exactly. I mean, I have been reading, and it seems that, for instance, among groups of young people, if some member of the group starts tweeting, like this is research of 2017. So it seems that if a member of a social group starts tweeting about politics, it seems that the other members tend to get more interested in these topics. So, I mean, the author, which right now I do not remember the name, was thinking that maybe for young people, the use of social media to talk about politics will develop more engaged citizens. So I mean, this can be also an opportunity, like for society to take a look into politics, besides the idea of the speech that has to be much shorter, much easier for everybody, also can lead into opportunity for politicians to reach people and for citizens to get more engaged. And if they are more informed and if they have access more data, they can also take better decisions, no? In case of voting, in case of deciding if they want to demonstrate, if they want to go to a protest. I mean, social media has, of course, a lot of advantages. It seems that it can have a lot of advantages for participation and for democracy. So maybe that's what we are going to experiment, but I don't know.
Well, I think you mentioned something I'd like. First, you mentioned that, I do agree that I don't know who the authors of this study are, but yeah, I think it's a way that people get more easily in touch with politics. You don't have to read this specific paper on this page to know something about it. But the type of information that people get on social media, I think, is different from what you see in traditional media. So the question then is, you mentioned, to become more informed. I might be, but I don't know in what way they actually, get informed, because what you also see on social media more and more is that, so also in line with what you said, someone in your group says something on social media, and these people then are more likely to also engage with it. So these people are then also quite often more likely to think in the same way as the other people. So social media might, this is still, research that's still a bit inconclusive, but also foster a bit more selective exposure. So the typical filter bubbles, echo chambers, theories that might actually lead to, polarized voters, people that only want to hear what they want to hear instead of getting an informed overview of all opinions and issues that are out there.
Yes, I completely agree with all your impressions. I mean, right now we have been talking about politics and the way citizens are using the social media, but we know that in a democracy and in political communication, it's not just the part of citizens. So let's take a look on the other side, and let's take a look on politicians, okay? And after that, we're going to talk about media, because I think that these are the main three characters in the recipe of democracy. So let's talk about politicians. You mentioned, and for me it was very sad, that you said like politicians have been lying the whole time, which is true. But I know that your master for your political science master degree was about post-truth, which is the idea that we are now in a time after truth. Like, we are not asking our politicians to even to not lie It's like we as citizens know that politicians are going to lie us, and we let them lie. I mean, that's the idea of post-truth politics, which is the concept that was developed in 2016. And when I was reading about post-truth, in some way I was thinking like, okay, you become nostalgic about the previous era. But now what you are telling me, that politicians have been lying the whole time, it's true. I mean, it's true. But now, why this concept also of post-truth arrived? Because, I mean, which is the difference between this idea, this concept of post-truth, before, how it was with politicians, and after 2016, what's going on with politicians? Do you have any idea why this concept originated?
First, I want to clarify, when I said that politicians lie, have always lied, I don't mean that they lie all the time.
Yeah, okay, that's true.
But I think that, lying is maybe a big word, but spinning might be better, like the glass is half full, half empty. I think that in a certain sense, you're talking about framing a certain problem in a way that benefits your own political agenda. I don't think this is lying. This is bias. This has always existed. So why now? Well, I think that has to do with what we discussed before. So the fact that it's now more prominent and it seems more present in our lives is because there is more reporting on it. So, that there was all of a sudden become fact-checking industries, which basically emerged after 2016 election with Trump, because people started like, hey, he's basically saying a lot of baloney. So let's start actually checking what he says. And this is where it started. And then they, this emerged into a whole new industry where everyone, including the media, including politicians, including people on Twitter and Facebook, were being fact-checked. So I think as a result of that, it became something very prominent in our lives. And so this is when I think the whole post-truth era started to emerge. But I think in a link to that, the post-truth era, and this is what you kind of summarized, I think that maybe more and more that people don't really care whether it's true or false, as long as it suits somebody's needs. So that maybe the veracity of what a politician says doesn't really matter that much, as long as he pursues his goals, he meets his goals and does what the electorate want of him, then people don't really care what the truthfulness is of all the claims of politicians. And I think this has to do with the reporting on it, that maybe more people accept this as something that, maybe it's okay, as long as, I can still eat my butter and bread, then I'm fine. But it's of course only one take on it. But, it's the post-truth era is usually, it feels like it was there all of a sudden. But if you really go back to also, it's like there was truthiness was also word of the year. I think this was 2015 or 14 even. So it has been a process, and I don't think it has been, all of the sudden. Yes,
that's true. I mean, right while you were explaining this to me, I was thinking, like, of course, before I was very nostalgic, as I just said, about politicians before, because, for instance, when I talk with my father, he's always telling me, like, politicians from before were better because they didn't lie, like this idea that before was always better. But now that you tell me, like, post-truth, we are able now to even talk about the truth, because we have more tools to take a look into what they are saying. So in fact now citizens are more powerful, let's say, or are more capable of taking a look, on examining, on asking for something to politicians, which is, for me, it's like a very new way of framing this idea of post-truth, in fact. But now, okay, when I was reading about post-truth, for me, it was something that called my attention, that there are two main characteristics, no, for politicians in post-truth. First, that they are doing or they are creating these rivalities. Like post-truth is also about creating rivalities. And the second characteristic is that they appeal to emotions. I mean, this has never been new, you know, it's not new because we are not creating anything, but the thing is, because, I mean, since the polls have started, there are a lot of questions that tend to ask about feelings. How do you feel about this? How do you feel about this policy, about this person? It's not about what do you think. There are like thermometers for citizens. So it's also about feelings. But now in post-truth, it's like, it seems that the idea of rivalry plus appealing to emotions has created like a new sort of communication, a new way for politicians to communicate with citizens. And I don't know, what have you been examining around this? What have you been discovered about around this?
So you're referring now to my master thesis?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, I don't think it's something necessarily new. I mean, politicians have always tried to appeal to emotions because that helps, especially in American politics. I don't know what it's like in Ecuador. I have not the fortune to study that yet, but I don't know, I think it comes closest. What I think is new, and that was also in the title of my thesis, is the concept of philosopher Harry Frankfurt, who wrote a little essay which is called On Bullshit, which again means that, you know, it doesn't matter what you say as long as it suits your needs. So I'm kind of repeating what I said before, but I think that might be a new thing. That, you know, first there was this, you know, accountability of politicians, they shouldn't lie. Then social media came and they were, you know, checking facts all the time. And what now people probably see is that, okay, you know, most politicians say some things that are not really true. There are these thermometers on how true it is. And as a consequence, perhaps, you know, people feel like, you know, I don't, you know, if any politician says something that might not be true, then, and I have to make a decision anyway, then how much should I care? And I think as a result, perhaps of that, politicians can, you know, use that more as a strategy. And Trump is the biggest example of this. He has said so much bullshit, basically, that, but still people voted for him because they believed in him and the things that he stands for. So I think I'm not so sure, because I really, you know, I haven't really studied politics and discourse before, let's say 2012. But that might be a new thing to appeal to emotions, just to, you know, you don't have to talk about the factual accuracy of some things that you're seeing around you, because if you feel that you are not making enough money, or if you feel that I don't know, cannot come up with another example now, but, you know, it's just about the way that you feel. It doesn't matter whether that's factually accurate or not. And this is something I think that politicians can now very, you know, easily appeal to, if that makes sense.
No, yes, of course. I was thinking, right now, you know, it's difficult. It's difficult for politicians first because now we are talking about feelings. I mean, there's a new huge wave of people feeling, which is something that before we weren't allowed. I mean, we were allowed to think about things, but now we are allowed to feel. So right now, you know, this idea of creating a narrative with emotions, it's so hard because we really, I mean, for me, the thing that is really new is that people is aware of the feelings. And as they are aware of the feelings, we do not know how we will act. Because this is new. And for me, society is new. Like people feeling and being aware of the feelings, it's new. And if we combine this with the speeches from politicians that are very emotive, we also do not know what we are going to get at the end. I mean, for me, this is in fact something that we should check, not just from communication, but also like from sociology, anthropologists, psychologists. Because right now, being in touch with feelings and talking about feelings and politicians also appealing to our feelings is something that may lead us to act in different ways.
So you're essentially saying that, you know, politics has become more personal?
Yes, exactly. Like less rational, you know.
I mean, I think that there have always been different ways of voting, right? Based on what you think is right or what you know is right, or, you know, this can even be against your own situation, so that it not, you know, it doesn't necessarily improve your own economic situation, for example, but still you believe this is the right thing, so that will be rational. But I actually think that most voters have always been emotional in the way that they vote. But I do agree with you. I think that politics in general has become more personalized, where it's a bit less about the points on the political agenda and more about the political figure himself. But this, I think also, I mean, this differs very, very much between countries. But I do, so I'm from the Netherlands, as you know. So in the Netherlands, I've seen, for example, the Green Left Party taking more of this personalized approach, where all of a sudden, you know, a person's face was the main campaign tool, whereas before this would be the main points on the political agenda. But I'm not so sure to what the degree this actually speaks to emotions. I think it definitely has to do with it, but I think there is definitely many questions that are still left to answer there.
Yes, no, that's true. I don't know if you have something else that for you is important to talk about the politicians in this complex political communication area.
No, none other than it. You know, it must be a hell of a hard task to navigate this field of communication. Luckily, there are advisors to help politicians, but I think it's become increasingly difficult to be a successful politician because you're being watched all the time, and you know, I don't think many things that now a politician can say or do without it being commented on. So no, nothing more than that for now.
Great. So now we have to go to the third character of this recipe, which is media. You know, so your last work was about, the title was "The Remedy Worse Than the Sickness, Comparing the Harms of Misinformation to to intervention against it," right? Yes, I don't know if, yes. So first, I want to for you to define with this what is this misinformation?
I mean, in the literature, there's always a distinction made between misinformation and disinformation, where in very short terms, misinformation are false claims spread by any actor that you can imagine, but without the actor necessarily knowing that it's false or intentionally spreading false misinformation, whereas disinformation includes this intention component. So it's, you know, purposefully disseminating false information. In my PhD thesis, I define it a bit more practically. So based on how I measure it in each of the chapters. So these can be false statements by politicians that were deemed false by fact checkers. These can be untrustworthy websites that often contain misleading stories. Yeah, those are the main two ways that I operationalize it in my thesis. But broadly speaking, information that credible evidence counters, let's say so. that does not supported by scientific evidence.
Okay, great. And now this misinformation is also spread by media. I mean, who generates it? How does it work?
Everyone, I guess. So all actors in the arena that you can imagine, from citizens to bots on social media to politicians can say false statements, but I think the large majority of it is probably citizens that create websites, because everyone can now create a website that's very similar to CNN, for example. You can make fake accounts on Twitter, even though they try to monitor this, but still it is possible. So I think for the largest extent that the huge amounts of misinformation are generated by citizens themselves. This is probably a dangerous statement, and of course also politicians play a role here, but
I'm sorry.
No, you can go.
But then, which is the role of media in misinformation? Because maybe it, like for politicians, when they do not say the complete truth, let's say, maybe it's the media, the ones that are checking it, and even to catalog if something is misinformation. Maybe also media is the one that checks what citizens are saying and determine if what they are saying is true or not. But maybe media can also produce misinformation. I don't know. I mean, it's a question for you.
Yes, I think here I'd like to make a distinction between, let's say, more traditional media outlets, and also fact-checking organizations, which now are increasingly part of these media outlets, but there also exist a large number of independent ones, and social media companies themselves, which now also have fact-checkers in service. So yeah, I think, of course, the role of the media is to hold people, so everyone who distributes misinformation, accountable, because I think it's, from a moral perspective, it's wrong to allow fake news on a platform. But I think at the same time, it is the purpose of the media and fact checkers to perhaps counter misperceptions. At least this is one of the concerns that comes with fake news. If there's too much fake news, then maybe people get wrong ideas. And even so that evidence is lacking in this respect, if you assume this to be true, then you could wonder whether, what is more important? Is it always holding someone accountable for what they're saying and that it's false? Or is it really to reduce misperceptions? Because I think that in holding people accountable, you in a way also repeat false information. A fact check doesn't exist without naming again the fact check itself. So this comes with risks, and perhaps if a fact check organization wouldn't have fact checked it, nobody would have seen the statement to begin with. So I think that I think it's definitely one of the roles that the media can have, is to hold citizens accountable, but it's also to take into account what this continuous reporting on fake news may actually may come with, what the consequences of this may be.
So now, because the title of your paper, of your thesis, was "Remedy Worse Than Sickness," So what do you think about it? Is the remedy worse than sickness, in fact?
I was actually asked during my PhD defense, but I think to a certain extent, yes, because I think if you look at all the research that is done about the effects of misinformation, there are a couple of things that come out. Few people see misinformation. If people see it, has only little effects, and and also few people share it. But yet again, the stories in the media tell, like the fake news is everywhere and everyone is sharing it, and this may have disastrous effects on anything. And well, I don't think that there should be no attention paid to the problem of misinformation at all. But I do think that the attention to it in the media may not be in proportion to the scope of misinformation itself. especially if you look at this research, then yeah, I think you kind of amplify and exaggerate the problem to a certain extent, making the problem so big that, you know, you decrease trust in citizens, that citizens become skeptical towards anything that they read. They don't trust politicians anymore. They don't trust the media anymore. And yeah, I don't know, it's as a result of this, and this is just speculating, perhaps people would just, you know, rely on themselves, the people that they know. And if you look at research on that strand, then we all know that causes polarization. And this has never been a really positive thing for democratic institutions. So yeah, I do think that there should be a bit more of a balance between how much misinformation is actually out there and consequently how much reporting on it should be done.
Great. Do you think that we have left something out towards media in this environment of misinformation, on this environment on democracy and political communication?
Probably when we end this interview, I can come up with
yes, it happens all the time, no?
Yeah. But no, I think we've covered quite a lot of things. It has to do with so many aspects. You know, we touched upon basically three that you know now in the interview. But I think for now I'm happy with what we covered.
No, I'm also very happy because, in fact, you know, to understand that it's very complex and that there are a lot of factors that we have to pay attention at. I mean, that in fact is something that is easy to forget. Because I think that when we talk about political communication, most of the time we think just about the message that we are going to publish, not about how people will receive it, and all these stages that the message has to go through in order to reach people, and how, you know, the message may be transformed in all of the stages, which is also something that we as communicators, as researchers, as people that are examining political communication must take a look. I mean, maybe the important thing is to keep studying, you know, to keep searching for the phenomenon that is there, because there is something that of course will change, and that of course will be new just because of the use of this media ecology that now is very popular, the concept. And maybe to be aware is the best advice that we can give.
Definitely. And I agree with you that like all the processes, you know, it's like, who sends the message? Why does this person send the message? Through which medium is the message sent? You know, there's, I think, the oldest media theories from McLuhan's, like saying the medium is the message. And then, you know, who receives it, where, when, with whom around. And I think all these things, you know, makes communication, political communication super complex, makes it a hard, but I think very interesting topic to study. But yeah, I mean, being aware of it is definitely, you know, all the things that cannot be good about social media and the media that you read. It's good to be critical, but I think what is also very important is that there still remains some kind of like a base or foundation of trust, because if we all, you know, start to distrust each other or the media that, you know, that is more leftist or rightist depending on your political leaning, and you just disregard that as saying like this is fake news, what Trump does, for example, then I don't think we'll get any further. So it's awareness, but I think also a mutual understanding, because by just talking to like-minded people, I don't think we'll come a long way.
Great, Emma, thank you for the time, thank you for all your knowledge and all your perceptions, because for me it was very interesting to hear what you're saying, to understand how you are looking at the future of political communication through, you know, the eyes of a scholar, of the eyes of someone that has been there with all the data, with all the information, and still is capable to give us this message of, okay, this is what is happening, but still we have to remain calm. We have to keep trusting, and we will have to also think that technology and tools will help us to find a solution, you know, to find a way that we will be able to find, to be comfortable with this. So thank you very much, Emma. It has been a pleasure. And now, for all the people that are following us, if you have any question, we will be very active in our social media, so we can answer to any further comment or question that you have. So thank you, Emma. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much for this engaging interview. It was very nice.
Thank you, Emma. Muchísimas gracias a todos los que nos escuchan, a todos los que nos han visto. Les recordamos que ComPolCorp realiza estas charlas para investigar y adentrarnos más en este mundo apasionante de la comunicación política y comunicación corporativa. Así que los invitamos a seguir al tanto de todos los productos que seguiremos produciendo para ustedes. Yo soy Andrea Carrillo Andrade, consultora en ComPolCorp, y conmigo será hasta la próxima ocasión.